everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today with me is Daniel McAdams.
I am.
And Daniel, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Right, doing well. Tell you what, we're going to talk about more news on Afghanistan. You know, there's a war going on in Afghanistan.
No.
Started a few years ago. Of course, we've been messing around with Afghanistan for decades. But we've been in war. Essentially, people consider that we've been in war for 16 years. And it hasn't gone all that well. But we have news out of Afghanistan. And what we have to do is dissect this out. We have to decide, you know, whether this is fake news, good news, or bad news. But on the surface, looks like good news, and there's several people. Generals are expressing the same message as the president of Afghanistan. They're all saying we've turned the corner, which they're implying that we've turned the corner against the Taliban, and that we're going to have peace and prosperity and democracy in Afghanistan, which they haven't had for a few years or a few hundred years. But since we've been involved, we have promised them that we will eventually deliver to them a democracy and show them how to follow the Constitution and promote liberties and civil liberties and all these things. But this goes back a long time, but it's recent now. We've heard this expression, but it's almost like they've gotten their marching orders, because it isn't just one person said, hey, you know, maybe we're turning the corner now. But not only is this message coming from various people that are involved in Afghanistan. This recent article by Moon of Alabama, he points out that this whole saying goes way back to 2003. In 2004, they were talking about, oh, we've been there a little bit. We're turning the corner. We've chased the Taliban out, and it's all over, and we're in charge. So I would say that this idea that we have turned the corner, and it's significant, and it's all good news, I would put that in the category highly suspect, maybe fake news.
Yeah, as you point out, Moon of Alabama is a blog that we look at from time to time, and they often have some very good insights. And this caught our attention earlier because he had a list of every time this phrase has been said. And as you point out, it dates back to the early 2000s. We first turned the corner in 2004 when Karzai was elected. That was a real turning the corner. But General Nicholson, who's in charge of our war in Afghanistan, said yesterday that we are turning the corner. Although he said in October that, or earlier this month, he said we're still in a stalemate. So we're turning the corner, stalemate, turning the corner again. He said yesterday that there's a new strategy for Afghanistan, and it means that we're on the path to winning.
Right, and we are accelerating. And one thing in the article that made the point that we made yesterday is, can we believe our government on how many troops are actually in Afghanistan? And he takes the same position. No, you can't believe it. But he also made a point that I don't think we made yesterday, is that the Pentagon is very upfront. These figures are not, accounting type figures. These are estimates. They didn't even claim these are the final figures, so that's their cover. And of course, there's a lot more troops over there than anybody has probably reported. But we say there's 15,000, and he agrees that there's the author of this article agrees that they're probably closer to 30,000 plus. So yes, we're very much involved. But the bombing mission has accelerated, and it's interesting. We have accelerated, and we shouldn't be too shocked. The president has been more consistent with accelerating the war on terrorism, and that of course is vague, and you can do anything you want if you're fighting terrorism. But he said no, he would actually do a lot of bombing, and he used some vulgar terms on how he was going to do it. And I think everybody should have been very much aware of the prolongation of the war. Because in as early as April, the president was in office just a couple of months, and he wanted to demonstrate, maybe he thought he could scare the living daylights out of them, and that they would do as we tell them. So he comes out with this bomb, the Moab bomb, but he is not responsible for that, because he had turned over the responsibility to the generals, and evidently the final decision was made by the generals. generals. That's hard for me to believe, but here it is. It's a big bomb, 11 tons. It's so big that bombers couldn't even carry it. They had to get a huge cargo plane to push it out the door and have it glide down and hit this. And they said it was very successful. And the best that they can count, there were no civilian casualties.
Incredible.
So
That's great.
that tells you a little bit of where we started and continue to go this year. But the bombings are continuing, massive bombings continuing, and they must have a strategy.
Well, the new strategy that was unveiled just a couple of months ago is pretty confusing. Nobody really knows what it is. It seems to be we have a stronger will to win than we did before. And Nicholson himself said yesterday, which I think demonstrates that he really has no clue what it means to win, what it looks like to win. Here's what he said. We will be here until the job is done. War is a contest of wills. The president has left no doubt in terms of our will to win. If we're only so easy.
Yes, and we slip into wars. We don't know why we go. We don't know when they end. We don't know who the enemy is. Costs a lot of money, and then they improvise, and it stays the same. More bombs, more people, more troops, and more. We've just turned the corner. It reminds me, a little bit about Vietnam. We were always turning the corner there. Victory is just on our doorstep. And I think another comparison that's interesting is they're talking now about this bombing is not to go after people, and certainly there will be no collateral damage, and and we won't we'll destroy some property, but it won't be good property, not the oil wells at least when we go into oil countries, but it's to change the terrain. Because we can't find these guys. The Taliban's sneaky. It's almost like they're hiding in their own hometown or something. Yeah. So we want to change the terrain, and Moab was an indication of changing terrain. And I got to thinking, this turning the corner was similar to Vietnam, but what about the similarity of what we were doing there when we used Agent Orange to burn the forest down? Because we couldn't see the enemy. They were sneaking around in their backyard in their own country, and we got to find them. So we're going to burn down the forest and Agent Orange. And of course, people are still suffering from that complication. And it's not the Vietnamese. A lot of American soldiers are still suffering from Agent Orange. But anyway, I see the similarity.
That is an amazing similarity when you think about it. I hadn't thought of it that way. And that's not the only one. Andrew Bacevich, who we've had on the show, who's a great expert, he wrote in the American Conservative magazine this summer that while there are some dissimilarities, of course, Afghanistan war resembles Vietnam in 3 key ways. And this is really interesting. A, drags on with no end in sight. Check. No evidence exists to suggest that more persistence will produce a positive outcome. Check. 3, those charged with managing the war have long since run out of ideas about how to turn things around. Check.
Yeah,
checkmate.
Well, I have 3 points too that I'd like to make that we should be talking about. How do we go to war? How do we get involved like it? The way to war, do we follow the rules? And I think we've stated what we think about that, and we slip into wars rather carelessly. Who pays for the war, and how is it paid for? Is it paid through debt? Is it paid through raising the income tax? Is it an honest payment for the war? Or could it be paid for through debt and monetizing debt and the Federal Reserve inflation, which causes so many distortions in the economy? And the third, who profits? Who profits from the war? So I think those 3 things, we ask those questions all the time and we emphasize this, but I think it could apply right here as a consequence of not asking those questions. How do we go to war, and who pays for it, and who makes the profits?
Yeah, those are 3 very good questions. Do you remember, and I know you remember this back in the Foreign Affairs Committee, when they announced that the Afghanis had held a Loya Jirga. Nobody had ever heard of it in the United States, ever, maybe 3 people. They held it, and they had a special ceremony at the Foreign Relations Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee. This is amazing. This is wonderful. They've had their Loya Jirga. Things are turning around. We've given them democracy, women's rights. How those heady times have faded as we drag on.
And there's another item that we think about specifically, Unit 4, Afghanistan, is the alliances that we make to get people to help fight our war. And this has been going on, it's been used endlessly, it's been used in Syria and different places. And that is to find some enemies of our enemies and convince them that they need to fight our enemies. And that was done during the Cold War a lot. Reagan believed in it, and it really blossomed during the 1980s with the Mujahideen, which was a radical group. And their main goal, I would say, political goal, was you foreigners stay out of our country. And Reagan correctly saw that, the Russians were involved, the Soviets were involved, and they were coming in. It was easy to get the people at home to say, defend your homeland, we need your help, and we need to defeat this, the Soviets. And so we linked up to the Mujahideen, which is a precursor to the Taliban. And all of a sudden, things shifted. When we became the invaders, why would they turn on us? I mean, we were their buddies, we helped them get rid of the Russians and the Soviets, and now we want to take care of you, and you're turning on us, and we've been fighting the Taliban ever since. And but maybe it's all coming to an end. Maybe we're absolutely too worried, and maybe we have turned the corner.
And this goes to the core of interventionism, this point you're making, because the reason they resisted the Soviets is because the Soviets came in and imposed a way of life on them that was not something they were used to. They were used to living in tribes and all these sorts of things. So the Soviets came in and imposed a new way of life, and they resisted. We came in the same way. We're going to give you democracy. We're going to do all these things for you. And they resisted. It shouldn't be a shock. You can't impose your way of life on other people's.
And of course, these wars have to be justified back here at home. Not so much that they're going to authorize the war correctly, but just so that people don't get angry about it. And so they say, well, we're over there for noble reasons. We're over there, and our troops are there to sacrifice for us. They protect our liberties and our Constitution by fighting some illegal, ill-advised, unconstitutional war, and they say it's in the national security interest. But when they say national security interest, they're talking about some type of material interest like oil and other things. No, you say, well, Afghanistan doesn't have oil. We must be doing it for the good of the people. But there's been pretty strong evidence that there's been an effort to use Afghanistan as a place where that our side can put our oil pipelines in there and gas lines. And I don't doubt for a minute that doesn't have some of the, provide some of the reasons for us being there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would, if I can end our little discussion, you pointed out the troops that the Pentagon doesn't know where it is. Here's the quote they said: the numbers that they're required by law to report of U.S. troops deployed, not meant to represent an accurate accounting of the troops deployed, So I would just say in closing, where is Congress once again? The Democrats are so obsessed with trying to get rid of this president. Okay, fine, we understand that. But here's an area where you should focus. 30,000 troops, nobody knows where they are. They need to refocus their efforts. Republicans, anti-war Republicans, need to refocus their efforts and try to rein in a president who thinks he can take us to war anywhere he wants.
Well, I don't have high hopes for the Congress coming through and doing something about this. When I look at all the fighting and the bickering and the little squabble that went on yesterday with the president and Pelosi and all, it's a distraction from it, because they're talking about taxes, very complicated, and whose ox is being gored, and it's an important issue, but they're not on a verge of solving all these problems. But boy, it can become pretty bitter. But where are they on this issue that Daniel just mentioned? Where are they on the war? Where are they about bringing the troops home? Where are the progressives who used to be opposed to war? They're nowhere to be heard. And the few libertarian conservatives are there. They're small in numbers, and they don't have a hearing. And so it's left up to the president to do whatever he wants. And I keep thinking, well, what we need is another UN resolution. And I at times say, well, what the UN is doing maybe is helpful, but that's how we got involved in Vietnam. They talk about the UN solving you know, the problem of North Vietnam, I'm sorry, North Korea. Well, how can they solve the problem of North Korea? The UN actually created North Korea. We went to war under UN resolution. So it makes the point that Daniel brings out, what is the whole basis of interventionism. Intervention means we should mind our own business. We should protect liberty here at home. We shouldn't pretend we know how to spread democracy and liberty around the world, and peace and prosperity, and emphasize our loyalty and dedication to our Constitution by killing a lot of people and subsidizing and helping to destroy Yemen, killing millions of people. I mean, if we're sincere, if the people are sincere, they would make the Congress pay attention to some of this. So the people are at fault because, yes, there's a lot of good people who agree with us, but we're small in number and we're not working hard enough to get that point. Even when Vietnam was raging, the people finally stopped Vietnam because the people finally turned on it because it was so insane. And they're starting to shift right now. Most people now are saying, we've been in Afghanistan too long. And from what we're reporting here, the increase in the bombing and the plans to put more troops there, no, we haven't turned our corners. We've turned around. We've turned our back on the American people. We've turned around and we're marching back in. And there are a lot of boots on the ground. And that's what has to change. When that changes, then we will have a much better chance to promote the principles that will lead to peace and prosperity. That is our goal. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.